This video will walk through how to compute descriptive statistics and create some data visualizations using Excel. This video goes along with Chapter 3 of our text, Applied Data Analysis in Psychology, Exploring Diversity with Statistics. The data for this exercise, which we used also in the JASP walkthrough if you viewed that video, comes from research considering how different work environment features might affect women who are working or planning to work in STEM fields. This experimental study involved women engineering students who performed a problem-solving task where their group composition varied in terms of the male to female ratio. Some women performed in groups where females were the minority, some women performed in groups where females were the majority, and then some women participated in groups where there was an equal ratio. They gathered a lot of data in this study, including how the women did on the task, how challenged versus threatened they felt in completing the task, and some measures on their implicit and explicit attitudes around sex stereotypes in engineering. We're going to use a few of their variables to demonstrate some basic descriptive analyses and graphing using Excel. Specifically, the skills that you'll gain from using this walkthrough and practicing yourself will be computing descriptive statistics, including measures of central tendency, variability, and measures to assess skewness and kurtosis for understanding normality. You'll create frequency counts using pivot tables in Excel, and you'll create a variety of visuals including bar charts, pie charts, histograms, box plots, and scatter plots. Here I've loaded the data that we're going to use for this exercise. This is an Excel file labeled PNAS, data for Excel with some numbers in between. You should have this available in your chapter materials. We learned previously how we can use some different formulas in Excel in order to calculate basic descriptive statistics, like formulas for calculating an average, a sum, standard deviation, and so on. We can also use what's called the data analysis add-in in order to compute some of those things a little bit more efficiently. If you haven't had the add-in installed before, you can find it going to File and Options. And then you can find the add-ins menu here, and you'll simply click where it says Analysis Tool Pack, highlight that Excel add-in, and down here where it says Manage Excel Add-ins, you'll click Go, and it'll bring you to this short little menu where you'll want to make sure there's a check mark here beside Analysis Tool Pack, and you'll click OK, and this gives you basics for data analysis in Excel. You'll be able to find that on the Data tab in data analysis. So if you did it correctly, you should have data analysis popping up there on your data tab in Excel. Now I'm ready to try out some of the functions in this data analysis tool pack. You can work with it directly in your main spreadsheet. I like to sometimes create a subset of the variables that I want to focus on, so it's a little bit more manageable whenever you start working with the data and you have it more easy to view. So I'm going to go ahead and select the variables that we're going to focus on. I'm going to do that by just clicking the top of the column. So first I'll click Subject, Column A. It'll highlight Column A. And then I'm going to hold down Control or Command if you're on a Mac. And I'm going to also select Condition, Ethnicity, Age, Threat by Challenge Score, and Stereotype IAT Score. And so those will be the things that I've selected. So that'll be column A, B, F, H, L, and M. And then I'm either going to do Control C to copy it or right click copy if you prefer. And I'm going to add a new sheet. So down here, this little plus sign at the bottom of Excel, where you hover over it, it says New Sheet. And I'm going to add a new spreadsheet so I have a clean version of my data. And I'm going to paste here, either right click paste or Control V for pasting that data. And so now I've got the subset of the variables that I'm most interested in right now. With that, I can go ahead and go to the data analysis tool by clicking that data analysis add-in. And as I open it up, there's a lot of different options in here for different types of analyses and different things it can do. I'm going to click descriptive statistics to get those basic descriptive pieces of information. I'll click OK here. And then I'll go ahead and I will be putting in my input range, which is what data do I want to go into the analysis. I'm going to focus just on 3 variables here, my 3 continuous variables for age, threat by challenge score, and stereotype IAT. So making sure my cursor is in this input range box where it's blinking there, I'm going to select all the data for those 3 variables. So starting with age and going all the way through the end of my data set, I'm going to select all values for those 3 variables. So it should say D1 to F117 if you've got yours lined up exactly as mine are. And one thing I'll need to do is check that I did include the labels in the first row. That means that when I selected my data, I included that first row that is text information rather than numbers. If I don't click this box that says labels in the first row, it'll get confused and it'll give me an error saying there's text information in here, it's not numbers, we can't compute this. So you'll want to just say, nope, those are my labels, which is going to help our output be labeled in a little bit more of an effective way. Then we need to decide, well, where do we want the results? We can select a new worksheet ply that will bring it up on a new sheet. Like when we added another sheet here, it would just create another one. Or we can select an output range. I like to do an output range for these types of analyses where I put it on the same sheet that I'm working with. So I can click here and make sure my cursor is flashing in that output range box. And I can select an area of cells. You don't have to be precise here, just select a general area, put it somewhere in here, and that's where it will go. So just make sure you selected a range of cells kind of next to your main data. The last thing we do is check summary statistics, and that's what tells Excel exactly what to provide back to us. We want the summary statistics, which will include descriptives for central tendency and variability. Once you have all that information filled out, your input range, check that you included labels, your output range, and your check for summary statistics, you can click OK. And this will generate your results here that'll show the descriptives for our 3 variables that we highlighted. You'll see that it labels what value is reported and then provides the actual value, and it'll repeat what the values are for each variable. So we have our information for age of what it is and that reported value, threat by challenge here for what it is and the reported value, and same thing for that IAT score. You can adjust the width of the column so that you can see it a little bit easier, so I can see the full label of what's being reported and then the number. You can also do that when you hover over between columns. If you double click when that double arrow is activated, it will make it the size of your longest piece of information in that cell. And so we have all of our descriptive information, just focusing first on age. We can see that the average age of our sample was 18.97, the median was 19, and the mean or the most common response was 18 years old. We see information on variability, the standard deviation, the sample variance, the range, as well as the minimum and maximum that were used to compute that range. And we have our measures that tell us about normality with skewness and kurtosis. For age in particular, we see that those values exceed our typical cutoff of plus or minus 2. And so these would be considered non-normal data. And if we were going to do further analysis with age, we might need some corrections or some adjustments because it doesn't follow a typical normal distribution. You can compare that, for instance, to these IAT scores where skewness and kurtosis are within a normal range, so they wouldn't present any issues if we were using it in some additional hypothesis testing. In addition to computing some of these descriptive statistics, sometimes we also want to know just basic frequency counts, like how many people were in each condition or how many people were in each ethnicity group. To create frequency counts, we're going to use an Excel tool called a pivot table. And these can be really functional tools. People use these in business settings all the time. They can be really helpful ways to just organize information. So to create a pivot table, I'm going to go to Insert, Pivot Table, and I need to tell it what data is it going to be working with. And I'm going to go ahead and say I want you to take all of this information into my options for my pivot table. So I'm going to select all of my data from subject number all the way through their IAT score and make sure all of my data is highlighted. And I'm this time going to request that this be on a new worksheet. I want a fresh worksheet to be able to work with. in order to kind of keep it focused a little bit. So I'll go ahead and click OK once I've selected all of my data and a new worksheet. You'll see the typical format is that you have your template here for the pivot table. This is where the table will be built. Over here is your list of variables that you can work with. And this area down at the bottom right is where we'll be moving information that we want in our table in order to be displayed. To get started, we're going to build out a pivot table for counting ethnicity. So I'm going to take ethnicity and I'm going to move it to my rows area because I want my different options for ethnicity listed in my rows. And then I'm also going to pull ethnicity to my values column. Now, right now it is set to sum the ethnicity values. We can change it to different options, like clicking here. I can click value field settings, and I can change this to a count. Instead of summing the values, maybe count the values of how often each occurs. And this is going to show me how often does each value or each option occur. Now this is still a little bit messy here because my rows aren't very descriptive. It's got ethnicity as 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so we can do a little bit of formatting to make it look a little bit better. So I'm going to take this actual pivot table and I'm going to copy it. I'm going to copy it and I'm going to paste it here, but this time when I paste, I'm going to paste just the values. So you'll see when you right click paste, there's this option that says values 1, 2, 3, and that's just going to paste my very basic values here. I'm going to get rid of my grand total because I want to just focus on presenting the overall count of each type of ethnicity that was reported. And if I go into my actual code book, I can see that there were labels for my different variables and I can adjust this. For instance, in my code book, 0 was the value for those who reported white as their ethnicity. 1 was the value reported if someone was Asian in their ethnicity. 2 was the value reported for those who identified their ethnicity as black. And then 3 was other, and 4 was Hispanic. So those are our ethnicities, and we can change this. Instead of saying row labels, we can put ethnicity to make that a little bit more descriptive. And then we have our actual count of ethnicity. We could relabel that to frequency because that is a little bit more specific in terms of the statistical term we use. And we could also add other features using formulas that we often see in descriptive tables, for instance, in JASP and other software. For instance, maybe we want the percent. And so we could calculate the percent using formulas by just saying percent is equal to, that's how you start a formula, this value, this count of 87, divided by our total sample size, which we know in our count here was 116, which is our grand total that we had in our chart. So we can click enter and we can apply that same formula now, take the number to the left, divide it by 116, and we can highlight that and move it down for each of our examples here. So we'll have, for instance, 75% were white, 15% Asian, 6% black, 2.5% other, and less than 1% or around 1% as Hispanic. You also often see in JASP and other software cumulative percent, and that is simply adding up percentages as you go. If we wanted to compute that in a format that would look the same as JASP, we would simply say equals this value for the top one. It's the same thing, 75% were white, and then we could add for the next one the previous value plus the next value to the left. And so it's saying take the previous percent and then add the one next to it. So we see 90% reported white or Asian. And if we copy that same formula down, it'll apply that same pattern. You'll see for the calculation for black, we'll see that it adds the previous cumulative percent plus the one to the left of it. And so 96%, or rounding up to 97%, were black, Asian, or white. And then we see eventually we'll get to a 1 here, which means the top or the full amount 1 is 100%. You can even change the formatting, so rather than decimal places, if you highlight these and click this little percent box in the number area, that will format it as a percent instead, so we can see those numbers displayed as full numbers instead of our numbers displayed as decimal places. There's many other options for how to format this in ways. For instance, for APA format, we often add borders. And so if I highlight, for instance, my top labels here, I can go and find this option for borders. This is under my main tools. I can click borders and I can add a bottom border and a top border. This is typical APA format to have borders. Oftentimes you also have a border at the bottom, so I could highlight the last row and put a bottom border in, and this would align it with APA formatting, and I can adjust my columns there a little bit to show this is what this would generally look like when we apply some APA formatting. Now beyond APA, there's lots of other formatting you can do. You can highlight and shade cells different colors. For instance, if I wanted to make this easier to follow and see where lines differ, I could add some light gray shading using this little paint bucket. I could apply some very light gray to every other row of data. If I want to apply some visuals that way, I can apply some formatting, and JASP often looks like that. So those are just some tricks you can do to change the different pieces that you're working with. Now, if we also wanted to, for instance, split our output by another variable like condition, we can do that. We can go click back on our pivot table area, and this will reactivate our pivot table. And let's say we want to take condition and we want to put it in the columns area. So I want to see ethnicity broken down by columns, and I can go ahead, it's saying there's already data there, and I can click OK. That's fine. To replace it, it's just going to overwrite the table that I created. Or if I wanted to, I could undo that, maybe move this table over. I'll copy that, scoot it over, and then I can go back to my pivot table and perform that. Move condition over into columns. And so now I'm going to see that I've got some more information for the count of what ethnicity is in each group. So for instance, 0 indicated white. I had 30 white participants in condition 1, 27 white participants in condition 2, and 30 white participants in condition 3. We could format this table again to make it a little bit easier to read by copying it. If we want to copy it and maybe move it down here, pasting just the values, then I can go ahead and add some formatting. I'll make these columns a little bit bigger here so we can see it better. And I could add the same labels for ethnicity. I created them over here, so I could copy my labels for ethnicity down here for white, Asian, Black, Hispanic, and other. And now I have my counts that I need to clarify. Well, what is condition 1 or condition 2? So I'll add this ethnicity label here, and then condition 1 was the female majority condition. Condition 2 was the female minority. Or this what condition 2 was actually equal distribution. Sorry about that. And 3 was the female minority. And so I can have the overall information about what condition they were in and the different counts for ethnicity for each group. Now, if I wanted to, I could also insert percentages. For instance, I could right click and insert some cells for each option. Can shift cells over. And I could add, for instance, if I move these up, I'm going to copy my labels and move them up. I could report both frequency and percent. And so I could show what percent of the sample was in each condition and of each ethnicity. I could show what percentage of the condition was in each group. For instance, if I want to know within my female majority group what percent were white, I can calculate this as the same way as before, equals the frequency count for white divided by the total that were in this female majority group, which was 42. And I can apply that same formula. I can copy it to my other group. I can see that 26% in this sample were Asian, none Black, 2% other, none Hispanic. And I could do the same thing for each group where I could add my frequency and percent. All you do is, again, select the area where you want to insert some cells, click insert, and shift your cells right. And you can add frequency, percent, and we could do that one more time, inserting some cells here, shifting cells to the right, and we could do frequency and percent. And so we would be doing the frequency, so our frequency value divided by our sample size for that condition. And we could see our complete table if we wanted something like that. You can do more formatting to make it a percent and a whole number instead. And we can just complete our table to do the same thing for our female minority group. Take the frequency count, divide by the sample size, the total, which was 41 for that group, and we can apply that all the way down and convert it to a percent. Some other small formatting things you might like in Excel. For instance, if I want female majority to be centered over this percent and frequency area, I could select these two cells, and there's an option where we can merge them. It's shown here, this little symbol. It may look bigger for yours. It says merge and center. I can click that to show center it over those variables, and do the same thing for equal representation and female minority. So the merge and center function is just another nice way to format your table, make it look a little bit better. And we could add, again, some more formatting. We could try to fix it so that we use that gray alternating pattern here. You can play around with some of that. If we wanted to add in our different borders, we can add top and bottom borders to those labels for our area. I've added top and bottom borders there, and we could add maybe a bottom border around the grand total. Those are just some examples of formatting you can do, and you've got an example of your textbook of a fully formatted version that just uses some of these different tips and tricks in order to make it look more formatted, more similar to what you would see, say, in JASP or other software, or what you might want to report in a final report of some sort. That's all we'll go through for the pivot table functions, but like I said, these can be really helpful. You can change them, you could adapt them, you could switch instead of ethnicity. We could move that out, and we could request, for instance, the rows be age instead. So we can make different edits for all of these variables and use that to compute lots of different values and lots of different comparisons. So you can play around with that and get used to using those. The one you'll do for your assignment that goes along with this chapter is relatively simple, just creating one more simple frequency table. The next thing we're going to move into is creating data visuals. So we're going to work with the same pivot table we just created in order to create some visuals. So we created our nice table that shows our overall frequency counts for ethnicity. Let's go ahead and try putting that now into a table. I'm going to take just the frequency counts, or putting that into a graph, We're going to take just the frequency counts and the labels. I'm going to highlight this information, and I'll just maybe move it to the side to make it a little bit easier for us to view. With this information highlighted, you can go to the Insert tab, or I believe it's the Charts tab if you're on a MacBook, and I'm going to insert a bar chart. So if you hover over any of these, it'll say what type of chart it is. This one with the little bars here says Insert Column or Bar Chart, and I'm going to insert just a simple 2D column chart. And I can move it over so I can see it next to my data. And you'll see I've created a bar chart that has the different ethnicities represented in my study, the frequency counts for those who are white, Asian, Black, other, Hispanic. There's a number of things you can edit when you make a chart in Excel. For instance, if I just double click on these bars, it'll open up a whole area here for formatting the data series. I could adjust the width between these different bars. I could make it smaller. If I want them to come closer together, I could have no gap or a little bit of a gap. So I can change how that looks, how spread apart those are. I can click things like this little bucket and change the color that is provided in my chart. If I want to change it to a different color, I could change it to green. I could leave it blue. I can double click where it says chart title and I can insert a more specific title. So if I double click there, I could say overall ethnicity of sample frequencies. Something descriptive like that to show this is what this is actually displaying. Another common way that we display categorical data is through a pie chart. So if I wanted to create a pie chart, I could take this same data, highlight it again, and I can say insert, and I'll look for the one that looks like a pie, and I'll insert a 2D pie chart. I can move it below, and I can see another way to represent my data through a pie chart. It has different colors for each slice of the pie, and we can see the sample was predominantly white, and this format often helps too if we're trying to show something more as a percentage. Sometimes people can understand that a little bit better. We can add a number of features. For instance, if I right click here, I could add data labels. So I can add data labels to include the actual percentage values or the actual frequency counts in this case, that we had 87 individuals who were white, 18 Asian, 7 black, 3 other, 1 Hispanic in this example. And again, to make it a little bit more visually easy to understand, I could go back and change my chart title to say ethnicity of sample or something a little bit more descriptive. Okay, now we're going to switch over into some additional charts that are more for continuous data. So we'll start and we'll create some different charts for some of our other data. I'm going to go back to my sheet that I was working with before. This was my pivot table sheet. My sheet 1 has all of the data included and my descriptive information. I'm going to go back to that sheet and I'm going to insert, in this example, a histogram of the age of our sample. So I'm going to go and I'm going to select the age column. I'm going to highlight here, age, and I'll go to insert again. And then here, this will say insert statistic chart, and I'll click this option for histogram. You'll see box and whisker plots are also included there. I'll click histogram for now, and we'll create this histogram of our age variable. Can scroll down to start to edit this a little bit more. We can again add a number of features. If I right click on my chart, I can add data labels to show how many were in each, to show the actual frequency count of 53 people that were around at the midpoint between 17 and 18, 37 between 18 and 19, and so on. So this gives my actual frequency counts that are included. And I can add a more descriptive title here. So age of sample participants. Something like that to make it a little bit more descriptive of what was the age of the different people in my sample. The other statistics plot we can use is a box plot. This can show us the distribution of our data as well if there's any outliers. So I'm going to again highlight all of my age data. I'm going to go to insert, and under that same area, insert statistic chart, I'm going to click box and whisker. I'll move this down so I can see it a little bit better again underneath my histogram chart. And I can again give it a more descriptive name, something like age, distribution of sample, something that tells what this is. And we can adjust this too. If we double click on the axis here, we can change the value. So I've double clicked there and under these options here, I can click and find axis options, these little bars. They can change your minimum and maximum value. So for instance, I could change my minimum, instead of it being 0 and way zoomed out, I could change it to 15. And if I click enter, I'll see my graph zoom in a little bit and it gets just a little bit more functional. The last thing we'll do is show how to create a visual if you wanted to see that visual split up by groups. So let's say, for instance, that I would like to see the age distribution for my 3 conditions. I want to see what is the age for my 3 different conditions all separated out. A nice way to do that is if we select all of our columns of data, we can click an option to add a filter. This is usually shown as this little funnel type display here. So I'm going to click that filter option and just click to insert a filter. You can also find this on the data tab. On the data tab where you see filter here, I can just click that also. And if I undo what I just did, highlight it, click filter in the data tab, or find it on your home screen for many versions with this drop down menu, clicking filter. And I can click for condition and request that it sort smallest to largest, just so that it sorts my data by condition. And then I'll be able to see all of my condition 1 first, all my condition 2, and then all my condition 3. And now what I want is to be able to arrange my age data side by side by side for my 3 conditions. And so to do that, I can do that a couple of ways. I could first just highlight for condition 1 all of my age variables. To make this a little bit easier to see, I'm just going to move both of these. I'm going to copy these 2 columns over into one more new sheet. And so I'm going to have my condition 1 is the female majority. Condition 2, if I went back to my code book, is the female, or is the equal. So condition 2 is going to be equal. And condition 3 is going to be my female minority. And so I'm going to take all of my data for age that has condition 1 next to it, and I'm just eyeballing this to make sure I get it right here. So you'll see all the way through row 43 is condition 1, and their ages are provided next to it. So I'm going to copy just the age data for those who have a 1 for their condition, and I'm going to paste it in my first column here. And then I'm going to find my condition 2. So I want to find condition 2, and I want to highlight everyone with a 2 next to them for condition. And I'm going to copy their age, and I'm going to move it over into my second column. So all of the ages of people in condition 2. And then last, for condition 3, I'll scroll back down to my data, and I'll find everyone with a 3 starting in row 77. I'm going to copy their data here, and I'm going to put it in my third column. So I have columns 1, 2, and 3, and those are the ages for my female majority, my equal ratio group, and my female minority group. And now once I have all my data side by side, I could highlight all 3 of these groups, the female majority, equal, and female minority. And I need to go all the way to where the data ends for my first group. If I highlight all of those pieces of data, I could go to Insert, and under my statistics charts, I could click a box and whisker. And this will show me the age distributions in my 3 groups. I can do some of the same editing there in order to make it a little bit easier to view. I can change my axis by double-clicking on the axis, clicking these little 3 bars for axis options, and change the minimum to 15. I can also add, if I want a chart element, you can click this little plus here, or add chart element. Either menu works. If I click my little plus, I can say that I want a legend to show what do these different color boxes mean. And so now I can see that legend, and I can choose where to display it. I could do it to the right instead to put it on the side of my display. And this will show the distribution of age by different groups. And I can add a descriptive title, of course, to say age by condition, something like that, to do the distribution of the age for my different conditions. The last type of visual that we'll look at is a scatter plot. So I'm going back to sheet 1 now. This is the one where my original subset of data was. And we can create a scatter plot when we have two visuals that are side by side or by selecting two columns. In this example, I'm going to select the threat by challenge score and the IET score. So I'll select both of those. So I've highlighted two columns of data, and I'm going to insert. And under my graphs, I see one that's got a bunch of dots on it, and it says insert scatter or dot plot, and I'm going to insert just a standard scatter plot here. Now I'm given a nice basic scatter plot. I'm going to move it over so I can see it a little bit separately from the other pieces. And we can do some more formatting to make it look a little bit easier to interpret. And we will want to label our X and Y axis to know what these different elements are. So if I add, for instance, axis titles, that can help to add labels. And the first variable I entered will be my X-axis variable. So that first one I entered was the threat by challenge. So I'm going to click here on this axis title and put threat by challenge score. And my Y-axis is going to represent the IET score. So I'll put IET score here to be able to show what was provided at each area. Sometimes it's a little bit harder with the sideways ones, but it's going to show what variable is going on each axis to make it a little bit easier to interpret. Other things that we'll learn about, such as when we get to regression, are things like we can add a trend line to show the overall trend and direction, that it's a positive trend. The more threatened versus challenged someone is, the more they tend to have a higher IET score. Those are just some of the basic things that we can do. And we can also, of course, change our title to do something like association between threat and IET. Give it some sort of descriptive label to show that we are plotting the association between these variables. There's some other things you can do. Pretty much anything you can click on. For instance, this trend line, I can format it. I can change how it looks. I can make it a solid line, and I can make it a different color if I wanted it to be red or blue to stand out. I can add a lot of different things to be able to change the format of these different options. So anything you can click on, you can adapt it and format it in Excel to make your visuals even stronger. And you can explore even to all of these different chart elements, things that you can add to any chart that can make it a little bit more visually appealing. That gets us through the main things we wanted to create for this walkthrough. Of course, there's lots more customization options in Excel, but this gives you some exposure to all of the main types of plots you're going to see used in Excel whenever you're working with different types of data and ways to describe and visualize your data.